Hello everybody and welcome to FreeSpirit-TV Information Beyond Mainstream. Today I'm very happy to present to you Jon Wedger. Jon is an ex-Scotland Yard detective who is campaigning for the protection of whistleblowers and who is raising funds for victims of abuse. I'm excited to talk with him about his story and his mission to increase awareness of the true extent of the heinous crime regarding child abuse. Stay tuned.
Hier noch eine Nachricht in eigener Sache. FreeSpirit-TV ist eines von mehreren Projekten des FreeSpirit-Bewusstseinstrainings. Dieses Training ist ein hervorragendes Konzept für Menschen, die einfach mehr vom Leben wollen. Wenn du dich nach etwas sehnst, sei es, dass du noch glücklicher sein möchtest oder reicher, gesünder oder nach einer tollen Beziehung, wenn du dich beruflich auf deine Vision konzentrieren und noch so einiges anderes verwirklichen möchtest, dann empfehlen wir dir von ganzem Herzen das FreeSpirit Bewusstseinstraining. Du findest es unter www.freespiritinfo.com. Ah ja, und noch etwas. Da immer mehr alternative Kanäle im Internet unterdrückt werden, wissen wir nicht, wie lange wir dort noch senden können. Für den Fall, dass die uns das Licht abdrehen, sei vorbereitet und abonniere daher unbedingt unseren Newsletter auf freespirit-tv.ch. Danke und schön, dass es dich gibt.
Jon, welcome.
No,
Thanks for being here.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Jon, for over 25 years you have been of service in the investigation of child abuse. And then what happened? Why did you retire?
Well, I retired with, I think it was 27 and a half years service with the Metropolitan Police. And the majority of that was as a detective. And I sort of, by accident, you know, ended up gravitating towards child abuse. And it was an area where I didn't intend to go, but it's where life took me. And that's where I ended up staying for a large part of my service. And it was probably the most intense work I ever did. It was hard and it was gutty and it was incredibly damaging work, but it was the most rewarding stuff I ever did. But it all came to an end really because I spoke out about the sheer extent of child abuse and child prostitution, mainly within London, and it was organised child prostitution. And when I spoke out really because I wanted the senior management to understand the full extent, because I didn't think they fully understood what was going on. Because there was two of us looking into a case. There was an allegation made by a young teenage girl that she was being used as a prostitute, being pimped out, as we'd say. And in looking at her, she then put us in touch with another girl, who puts us in touch with another girl, and it snowballed. It just got bigger and bigger by the day. And we was actually getting swamped with the work, and it was horrendous what these kids were disclosing. And there was no real record of it being disclosed before. So I thought it was like new territory. So all I did was just compile a report for the senior officers. And really it was for them to understand what was going on, but also we needed help because we didn't have any resources. There was at first just two of us on there. And
how many children were involved?
It started off with one, and then within a few days it got to two, and then it just sort of multiplied. I mean, I think there was about 34 kids in that one little investigation that got identified. But when it went to court, it was really reduced down. But then another investigation I looked at, I was told that there wasn't a problem with child prostitution. And within a week I found 50 children. So it just shows how massive it was, and that was within a week. And I'll get onto that on the chronology of it, how quickly I found these kids and how easy it was to find them. And I thought that the senior management of the police, the high-ranked officers, would welcome what I was telling them because I was exposing organised criminality involving children. But actually what did happen was the total opposite to what I was expecting. You know, I thought I'd be praised.
Yeah.
You know, I thought
you would
I'd
think
be,
so.
Yeah, rewarded. But in fact, I was brutally attacked. Not physically, but I was threatened, and I was threatened in the most awful way. And funny enough, the threats that were given to me, I was told that if I mentioned a word of what I'd exposed, I would lose my home, my job, and my children. And I had to back down, otherwise I would be thrown to the wolves. I was then told that I had no idea who or what I was dealing with.
And who was telling you that? Your boss, directly?
This was a senior officer who went on to become one of the UK's most senior police officers. He was massively promoted after that. And the thing is that over the ensuing years, everything he said to me happened. So I did nearly lose my job. I nearly lost my liberty. There was 9 attempts to imprison me. And I nearly lost my home because they stopped paying me. I went without a wage for nearly 3 years. And in the end, I nearly lost one of my children because there was an attempt to take one of my kids into care at one of the lowest points in my life. So I can get onto that at the right time because it's quite an important message out there. Really, there is no extent that the British police, and it's not just the British police because I've spoken to other people from elsewhere, there's no extent that the establishment will go to cover up the systemic abuse and prostitution of children. And I was then to realise how important children were in organised crime and politics and everything else, the things I've learned over the last few years. I mean, I'm happily out of the police now. It was a shame because it was a brilliant career, and detective work is incredibly interesting, especially in a city like London. You know, one of the busiest cities in the world, one of the most diverse cities in the world, and a place where policing began. You know, when British police were shown as a benchmark of policing throughout the world. If Scotland Yard detective, you know, they're known everywhere in every country, and as a point of excellence. And it was just a shame, really, when I actually learnt the truth about what was really going on. So I was happy, really, to get out, to be free. And in doing that, it allowed me to speak out more freely. I mean, my battle still goes on. I'm due to give evidence at a government inquiry into the cover-ups next month in October. I'm taking the Metropolitan Police to a tribunal court next year for what they did to me in order to silence me. And I'm speaking out, which is the most important thing, and it is really having the voice. And this is one thing that the victims that lack. In order for child abuse damages, it's pure rot, it's cancer. It destroys their soul. And in order really for people to get healing, they need retribution. They need to know that something's being done, right? And they need a voice. They need to be what they call witnessed. They need a say, and they're being denied that. And it causes frustration, it causes hatred, it causes anger, and it causes addictions, and it causes just a total self-deterioration, you know, and we see that on our streets. We see that with our drug addicts, we see that with our homelessness, we see that with our massively increasing prison population. And really what I found out, and it's just through, not just through my research, but from the professionals I've spoken to, that child abuse is at the core of so much. And it just doesn't get the attention that it really needs and the exposure that it really needs.
Yeah, I believe that too. That's why I always want to interview people like you who are so courageous to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
What do you think is the reason, or can you explain to our viewers why you can't name names?
Right, naming names is a dangerous thing because the libel laws are very, very strong. Now, if I've been attacked on social media, Jon Wedger doesn't name names, it would be pointless because I would probably end up being silenced for good and imprisoned. And what's the point of that? Yeah. You know, there's a parable in the Bible and it's called The Man Down the Well. And it's about a rich guy jumps down the well to be with a man who'd fallen down there. And the guy who was down the well said, you know, you're crazy. Why have you jumped down there? You could have used your wealth to buy a ladder, to get a bit of rope, to summons help. And it's very similar to this situation. If you go out there and start spurting names, and sometimes it's very difficult to prove to a court standard as well. Especially in the UK, we've got one of the highest burdens of proof in the world. We've got beyond all reasonable doubt. We've got a common law system where there is a presumption of innocence, whereas Europe, especially in you know, Central Europe and countries like this, you've got a presumption of guilt. This is a different system. And to prove beyond all reasonable doubt, really, you've got to prove 99% that the person's done it. And then if you speak out, then the legal teams will get involved and, you know, I'll get crushed.
Yeah.
And it will just be absolutely futile. But I will name names, and I will name names if I'm asked in the inquiry, and I will name names in the court. Okay. And that is the right place for it. And I don't want to cause any instability or hinder all the hard work, not just I've done, but all the other victims that have come forward have done, you know?
Yeah.
And we have seen too many people silenced and sent to court and then sent to prison. And we have seen it a lot in the UK recently. And it's pointless, it's a waste of time. And they're getting heavily sentenced, you know. And we've just seen a case of a woman called Sabine McNeil who spoke out and basically did naming names with the Hampstead case, which was the satanic abuse case in there. And they've given this woman, I think she's in her 70s, 9 years. I mean, it may well kill her, you know. We've just seen another case of a guy called Carl Beach who spoke out about VIP paedophile rings, and they sentenced him to 18 years. And they've just cast him as a liar. Now, the guy has got a questionable character. That is a matter of fact, because he has got convictions, and some of them are awful convictions against children. But this brings it back to the other sad statistics, that there are people that have been abused go on to abuse. Not all of them, and I'm not saying that at all. I really don't want that to be expanded on, but a lot of people that do abuse have been abused themselves.
It is the way it is, yeah.
And unfortunately, that will get used if they're speaking out as a witness for other cases. No way am I agreeing to it at all. And a lot of the good people that I've worked with, victims of abuse, the last thing they would ever think of doing is hurting anyone, you know. And it's quite strange, because I do a lot of stuff now with convicted criminals, and people that have suffered awful, horrendous abuse. I mean, if you did it to an animal, you go to prison, That they've done it to the children, and you know, nothing. And these people won't harm a hair on a child's head or an animal, you know. But they get hold on and abuse them. My God, they'd take their heads off, you know. But the system in the UK, the criminal justice system, has deliberately failed victims and survivors of sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse, and they have. And I hope that my experience has proved that it has been a deliberate attempt, and especially in my case it was. It was absolutely appalling what they covered up, and they deliberately covered it up.
But so many of your, I guess, also colleagues stay quiet.
They do.
Or how did they react?
Well, the funny thing is, I've addressed Parliament on quite a few occasions, and I spoke out at a victim and survivors debate that they had in Parliament in one of the committee rooms, and I turned around and said, whistleblowers are very much like victims of abuse. When you stand up, you stand alone. No one will stand with you. No one. You know, I've had people come up to me and said, you know, I knew what was going on, and you're really brave for doing it. But for me, I've seen a lot of criminality involving the police, and it really didn't bother me. And I'm saying that people might be appalled by it, but it was a game. The criminals played a game, we played a game, and sometimes the line got crossed. But when it involved cover-up of child abuse and child prostitution, no way was I...
It's something different, right?
My God, no way. No way was I ever... In any sort of work, you're going to get people get their perks. There's always a little scam where in sales, in whatever it is, someone will always get a bit of money from the back or whatever. You know, that's how it works. That's how it's always worked. Get on with it. I don't want nothing to do with it, but get on with it. But when it comes to this, this was just wrong.
Yeah.
And not only that, I saw what child abuse did to society. I saw what it did to the individual, what it did to their soul, and the damage that it went on to cause, and then the dysfunctionality when that person then went on to have children, and then the children got put in care because they couldn't parent properly, and then the criminality, the alcoholism, the drug addiction, you know, the prison sentences, the social services, and then you see a whole industry that's built around dysfunctionality, and a whole industry that makes billions. So it's money making. So there's so many levels to this, and it sort of goes on to explain why they don't want it exposed. And also, people, perverts, evil people, enjoy having sex with children.
Yeah.
It is their drug. It is what gives them energy. It's what they like doing. And they pick on weak people, which are children. They're vulnerable, and they do so knowing that they'll never be exposed. And it has gone on for generation after generation. We are seeing it come out now in the UK more so than ever before, with what went on with the children's homes, what went on within the religious institutions that cared for children, what went on in boarding schools, even, you know, the high up boarding schools like Eton, which is where most of the prime ministers and the royal family went to. And there's one guy who went there and he spoke out about it.
Oh, okay.
He spoke out about, and he wrote a book about the abuse that went on, the sexual abuse that went on there. And then, you know, what does that do to person's mind? It's quite funny because, again, I don't mean funny in that sense, but there was one woman I knew, and a good woman, and she helped me quite a bit, but she was saying she couldn't comprehend why an adult would do this to a child. And I said, well, it's not been your reality. And I said, you walk to work. She went, yeah, I walk to work. So I said, so when you walk to work, if you think about your family and your parents brought up in a lovely background, you know, nice mum and dad, caring environment. And I said, when you think about your family, does it cheer you up? Does it make your step lighter, make you walk happier, put a smile on your face? She went, yeah. So I said, the next day you walk to school, think about, as you're walking to school, that morning, having to put your dad's penis in your mouth and see what that does to you for the rest of your day. And she went, oh my God, that's disgusting, why are you saying that? I said, because that's the reality. Yeah. You know, that's the shame, you know, and there shouldn't be any shame because these are victims, you know, they never brought on themselves, these evil people did that to them. And you think that every decision you made is based on that abuse and worse, you know, and especially some of them. A fantastic guy that I do a lot of work with, the abuse on him started when he was put into a care home without his mother and father at the age of 4. You know, 4 years old. The abuse was many levels. It was in religious institutions, and it was physical violence, extreme physical violence, emotional abuse as well, and just their whole attitude towards their children, that they didn't care for them. And then it was sexual abuse. You know, so if you get an animal, you get a puppy dog, and you get hold of that dog and you love it and you care for it and you walk it and you make it part of your family, you've got a friend for life, you've got a beautiful little animal there. You get that dog and you kick it, you beat it, you shout at it, you insert things into its orifices. There's not a human being would be able to put their hand near that dog without it being bitten off. Yeah. Yet the compassion of the human being, where the people are known that they've had this done to them and they've got the biggest hearts imaginable, you know. And it's because of them I continue to do what I've done, and it's to stop it ever happening again. And the other thing is, what the victims want, they want the world to know what went on. They want them to know what the British government, and I now know it's bigger than that, but at the time, for me, it was just the British system that I was dealing with. And the person who opened my eyes to it was a lovely lady called Corinne Hutzpart that I know you've interviewed. And she dealt with it on a more of an international level. And funny enough, as I started dealing with more and more victims of this awful abuse, they were, you know, taken from children's homes and were taken off to mainland Europe for so-called holidays and things like that. And it did go on. So, but what people need to realise is that organised crime, the biggest commodity is not drugs, it's not guns, it's children. Children are behind it. They are the biggest money machine that there is. And they make a lot of money from it, a lot of money.
That's just insane. But still, the question remains for me, how can they deal with this attitude of looking away? Your colleagues, for example, your ex-colleagues. How do you explain that?
I can't explain it.
While knowing that there are so many children suffering.
When it comes to, I mean, I can only make an assumption. Now, when it comes to the higher up threatening me, they knew what was going on. They knew that this was organised, and they knew the money that was involved, and they knew the people that were involved. And I genuinely believe, from the information I've received and my wisdom and knowledge through dealing with this, that it can and probably does affect not just domestic but global politics.
Yes.
you know, where there will be people high up in society that have been videoed having sex with children and things like that. And that's not even going on to the other dark subject of satanic ritual abuse, which is even more monumental. So I think when it comes to that level, when they threatened me, they knew what was going on. Now, whether they were put in place to be gatekeepers to prevent that evidence ever getting out, which may well be the case, maybe they were complicit in it, maybe they were involved in it, I'll never know, and they'll never admit to it anyway. Lower down, people are comfortable and they don't want to rock the boat. And also when you take things like the police and the military, people are disciplined. And you're brought up in a disciplined environment and you're brought up to do as you're told. And, you know, policing in Europe on the whole is civilian. You know, there are one or two paramilitary forces that they've got in Spain and in Italy, but on the whole, it is still a you know, a civilian thing, but its roots are in the military. The British police, when I joined, were trained. We had ex-guardsmen, ex-army soldiers would take us for marching. We had to march to a military standard. We had to be in parade. We had to do as they were told. Our uniform had to be immaculate. So, and our physical training was run by guys from the military. So, at what point was it not a military setup? It was. You did as you were told. So they drum that into you, and therefore you've got such a high rank structure as well, and you're fearful of losing your job, you're fearful of getting in trouble and everything else, and fearful of going to prison. So you do as you're told. But with me, I spoke out, and then this campaign of bullying occurred, and that was appalling. And it went on over a long period of time, but it really intensified when I made criminal allegations against high-ranking officers, and then the effort on investigating wasn't put towards them, it was put on towards me. And they did a hard job in trying to get me in prison. They really put every effort they could into get me.
And how did you deal with this bullying and all these threats?
Well, I mean, how I did was I just refused to give in to them. But it crippled me. It crippled me on every level. I mean, I'll go into it because what happened was I had a good career in the police, and I went onto a unit, and it was working, looking at paedophiles that had gone missing. In 1997, a law was passed in England where sex offenders had to register on a police register. It's a sex offenders register. But people weren't registering, they were going missing, and they didn't know where they'd gone. And there was rumours coming out from the prison system that sex offenders were telling each other to go and live on boats. And because the UK has got an extensive canal and a river network, and people live on boats, these canal boats. In Holland, it's a big thing as well. I don't know, in France it is. But the UK, it was, because we had the British Empire, they built canals which linked all the main rivers together, and that's how the trade was done. We're a maritime race, the British, so everything's done on boats. You know, now there's no need for it. We've got roads and rail, but so they've gone into being accommodation people. It's a nice way of life. But these areas weren't being policed, and it was a loophole in the law which allowed people to move about in boats and not have to register. So I was asked to look at it and say, you know, we've heard there's 2 paedophiles, you know, dangerous paedophiles living on boats. Can you go and check it out? So I said, yeah, okay. He said, you know, if you find another 2, we'll be happy. But within 3 months, I found 90. And you know, these are really dangerous individuals, and they were involving themselves with children's charities and doing help for disabled children, and
oh God,
no one had really known about them. So, but what happened then, that caused a problem, and it got high up in the police and sort of heard what was being exposed, and I was removed, and I was told by a senior officer, look, it's come from high up. We got to shut it down. But at the time I was working with an officer from the paedophile unit, the first country to have a paedophile unit, dedicated paedophile unit. And he said, it happens all the time. John, he said, we had, and there was a politician in the UK, he was Home Secretary, and he said, we had him twice. We had him, you know, what we call bang to rights, involved with sex with young boys. And each time the case was shut down. He said, and this is exactly what's happened, you've caused problems. He said, it will always happen, and it will just, boom, happen overnight. And that's when I realised there was a conspiracy.
Yep.
And what we hear, especially in the alternate media, go conspiracy, you get branded conspiracy theories. Well, conspiracy is an offence. You conspire with another to commit a crime.
Yep.
So it's not something that doesn't exist. Conspiracies do exist, and they exist in law throughout the world. You know, I realised that these conspiracy theories actually are a conspiracy reality. They're a conspiracy fact. They do occur. So I left that unit, and it was a shame because I enjoyed it. And then I went on to a Scotland Yard unit, and it was Vice, dealing with prostitutes. And it was, well, prostitutes, gambling and drinking. And it was, so I was working initially with street prostitutes, and they were just clearing the street with these prostitutes. And when you got talking to them, they were prosecuting these women, but they were all drug addicts, and they all came from the care system. Now, I'd heard this earlier on in my career when the part of London I was working in had a major problem with heroin addiction, and with heroin addiction causes poverty, and then you get a lot of criminality coming out of there. And a lot of them, when you spoke to the heroin addicts, have been in the care system, and these are children's homes, and the children are put in there because there's problems at home for whatever reason, and they're going to these homes and they were being sexually abused. Now again,
in the children's homes.
In the children's homes, you know. And then when we look at sexual abuse, we hear this word abuse, and that might be swearing at someone, but it's not abuse. We're talking about rape. We're talking about young children. You know, the testimonies I heard from were really from the age of 4, what they can remember, but I know it went on a lot younger. You know, 4-year-old child a boy being anally raped and then whipped and beaten. You know, when they've come from a home environment, and well, what the hell would that do to your mind and to your body? And it was only later then I started finding out that, you know, women were unable to have children because their wombs were misaligned because of the damage that it had done to a young body. The men were having problems with incontinence, and also were having spinal problems because the bowel was ruptured and things like that. And we don't hear about this, you know, the pain it causes, the physical pain and the trauma. And then they turn to drugs because heroin is a painkiller. It's an analgesic.
Yeah.
And pain comes in many forms, you know. So when I started with the street prostitutes, you know, they were just really going out there and just seeing how many prostitutes they could round up in a night, and having competitions between themselves, the police officers, how many they could arrest. But really, they were victims, and they held a lot of information as well. And I started talking to them and getting the information. And one day, there was a little girl that said, look, there are girls, young girls that turn up, and there's men that ask us to get young girls. And there was a young girl appeared on the street, and she was 14, but she was on heroin, on crack cocaine, and she was underweight and under height, so she looked a lot younger, and these men would target this girl. And a lot of these girls, you know, they would be paid extra money to have anal sex unprotected and things like that. And so you can imagine the diseases they're then picking up, you know, life-threatening diseases. So they then get infected, but then they become a carrier of these diseases, and it just gets spread and spread. And this one girl, we picked her up one night, and to take her into care, into protective custody, and we're told to get rid of her because she had scabies. She had this, scabies is a mite that rough sleepers get, you know. And they said it will infect the car and it will get into the clothes, and then if you take her back to the police station, the room will need to be cleaned, and so just get rid of her, tell her to go. You know, 14-year-old girl. So what happened then was that a young girl would come forward and said, look, that she was being used as a prostitute. So I was asked to go and speak to her, and they said, we think she's a liar because she keeps making these allegations. And who she was making them against, who her pimp was a woman prostitute that the police had known for many, many, many years. And actually, I found out that they'd known that this woman had actually been involved with young girls, pimping them out for people.
Oh, that's
and
so
done
also
nothing
women
about it.
are involved.
Yeah, females, yeah, of course. And this is another myth. You know, and Corinne actually mentions this. She said, you know, when a woman paedophile is active, the viciousness that she dishes out, a man isn't actually capable of it, you know.
Yeah, that's what he told us.
Men are more prolific, but the women make up for it in their intensity to harm, you know. Yeah, so women are, and again, this is what they call grooming. The woman was used to replace the mother figure, and there's always a void in these children's lives because they probably come from a very bad background, and there's probably been abuse at home as well, sexual abuse at home, and sometimes children, Aline, go into the care system because they are getting abused at home. So this one girl, I went to see her, and she was so accurate with her information. She weren't lying. She said, the police don't want to listen to me. So not just me, you know, me and my partner I was working with, we said, well, we'll listen, we'll take your evidence. And her evidence was compelling, and it paid off because it matched up. We corroborated her evidence. And it linked him with more children and more children. And the youngest was 9 years old, and they went up to about 14. But then we found out that the clients could be very wealthy Arabs. There was, in the cover-up, there was a judge involved in the cover-up. There was someone involved on the BBC was involved. But also the children would be taken and sold for crack cocaine, swapped for crack cocaine. And 1 minute in what we call a crack house, be traded for 20 rocks for an hour amongst other drug users, and then they could be taken to a really wealthy part of central London and traded to wealthy Arabs for £2,000 an hour. And it was just massive and massive. But then social workers started speaking to us, and then they started saying, look, this has been going on for so long, and your unit, which is the only unit that was allowed to deal with it. Now this is another way the police controls information. Certain units are only allowed to deal with certain crimes, so it gets taken off. And in my opinion, it's so they can contain the information.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's what I found out. You know, so this one social worker said, you know, these girls are in trouble, mainly girls, but there were boys as well. So one girl, she's got such bad infections that there is all sorts of liquids just oozing out of her. She is just dying. There's sores and abscesses inside her body through constant sex with men, unprotected and just passed around. And she said, we've been to your unit for the last 10 years, 10, 15 years or something. And she said, they never turn up at our meetings. So I highlighted the sheer extent of what was going on. And also there was an organised crime element. There were gangsters involved. And there was connections to people high up in the establishment involved with it. And my boss, I liked the guy, he was always okay, but when I wrote the report, he just turned on me, and he did, he threatened me, like I said earlier. He said, you'll lose your home, your children and your job, you've got to shut your effing mouth. Started swearing, he said, you've got no idea what you're dealing with. He said, if I can't help you, if you keep talking about this, you'll be thrown to the walls, you'll lose everything.
So he was afraid too, huh?
Yeah. For whatever his reasons. Now, I don't think there's any honour in his reasons because he's a family man, so he must have, well, he did have children. So what the hell's going on, you know? Yeah. But I moved from that unit and I went to another unit, again, that was dealing with child abuse, and I was warned, don't ever look into this again. And I went on to this unit, and the first day I was there, it was a child abuse unit. So before I was on Vice, now I've gone on to child abuse.
And for Vice is what exactly?
Vice is prostitution.
It's
Vice, so it's prostitution. So it involves gambling. It's just it's a strange term, but well, they call it vices. You're a drinker, you're a smoker, you're a womanizer. It's a vice. And this unit had quite a terrible past. There's a lot of books been written about this Scotland Yard unit, the Vice unit, a lot of corruption.
Okay.
Because there was a lot of police officers were being paid huge amounts of money by men controlling gangsters controlling prostitution, to not look at it. And It resulted in a massive government inquiry back in, I think, the 70s.
Oh, okay.
You know, so there's big money in it. But I went on to this other unit, which is where really children are taken in and put into the care system because there's problems at home. And I remember going in and I said to the sergeant at the time, I said, can I ask, is there a problem with child prostitution? She went, no, not at all. I went, okay. And I said, I've just come from Vice and it's huge, you know, and it did cross over with your unit. She went, no, there was one girl was asked to look at it. She spent 2 years and never uncovered anything. And if you want to look at it, you can. And there'll be a few meetings with social workers, but it's a waste of time. So what I did was I rang up the social services for that area, the part of London. It was a busy part of London. And I said, can I have a list of all the children's homes? So they gave me a list. There was 20, I think either 22 or 26, might have been 26 children's homes in this small part of London, which is a lot of children's homes.
It's a lot, right?
Hell of a lot, yeah. And I found out it was the most amount of children's homes anywhere in London or the UK. And the list come through, and when the list come through, I picked the phone up, and I literally picked the phone up, and I rang the first number, and I said, this is who I am. Is this so-and-so children's home? They went, yeah. I said, how many children have you got? I said, well, about 5 children. And I explained what I was looking at. How many of these do you think are involved in prostitution, or do you lose a weekend to prostitution? Went 3 straight away. So one police officer had 2 years and found nothing within 5 minutes. By the end of that day, I think I found 10. By the end of the week, I found 50 children. And again, I started investigating, looking into it against what I was told.
I just wanted to ask if you were allowed, but you were not, probably.
No, and well, I wasn't. I just didn't tell the Vice unit what I was doing because it started going into their territory. So I sort of made it my problem within the child abuse scene. So I arranged a meeting. So I got social workers, senior social workers, and I got what we call outreach workers, people that work in different charities. And there's a big charity in the UK that helps children, the #1 charity. And again, I've got to be very careful. And the head of sort of child exploitation was at this meeting. And I presented this list of the top 10 children that are really in trouble. And said, look, we all need to work together. And all of a sudden, the senior social workers stood up, started shouting at me. So what have you done to us? I said, what do you mean, what have I done? She went, this is going to cause a massive problem. We've got to put care orders in for every child. We haven't got the staff to deal with this. I said, but you knew these children were involved.
What about the children?
Yeah, I said, you knew that. She said, well, they haven't come to notice. Well, they haven't come to notice because they were working as prostitutes and earning money. So they weren't coming to notice, you know. They were only coming to notice because they were going missing. They were missing persons. Again, this is what ties in with the amount of children that go missing. And I know I was asked to comment on something David Icke said when he said thousands of children, tens of thousands of children go missing. Yes, they do, but they don't go missing and never seen again. They come back.
Okay.
But while they're missing, they're being used as prostitutes. They weren't as prostitutes. And then I had the head of this children's charity stand up, and she started shouting, and she said, you're treading on toes. You shouldn't be looking at this. She said, we've got a team to deal with this. You need to back down.
Obviously not,
No.
or they're dealing differently.
Well, exactly. And so I found out that there was one girl appointed to look at this problem. And how the hell would that work? It was just massive. And I spoke to her. And I said, look, are you looking at the child prostitution? She went, well, how can I? She said, I've not even met any of the children. She said, I go to meetings, but we've never stopped a kid being prostituted. We've never arrested a pimp. And then this woman from the charity reported me to a senior officer, and I got worried because I thought, oh my God. Now, on a personal level, from the year 2000, I brought up 4 children on my own, and the youngest was only 9 months at the time. And I was frightened that I genuinely believed that the police could take my children off me, only because of what the officer told me years ago about the politicians who were involved in it was powerful. and you know the interest of the security services, which are the military intelligence services in the UK, and I genuinely believe that they had the power to take my children off.
Yeah.
So I got very fearful, and I would really panic with senior officers. I didn't want them near me. I got to a point where they would put the fear of God into me.
Yeah, I understand that.
So I sort of was too frightened for a couple of years to sort of progress anything. And again, I was moved. I kept getting moved. And then something happened in the UK, in as much as people started speaking out. And there was a children's TV presenter, DJ called Jimmy Savile. And he'd been all over the TV, Kiss TV, for decades and decades. And there'd always been rumours about this man as being a pervert and a paedophile. Yet he seemed untouchable. He was friends with the royal family. He was best friends with Prince Charles. He spent something like 7 consecutive Christmases with Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister. He was friends with Mossad and all that. And this guy, when he died, and then all of a sudden it came out, and they ran a TV program about the proliferation, how much he was involved in raping children, you know, girls and boys, and especially handicapped children. Now, he'd actually opened hospitals for handicapped.
That's awful.
And the switchboards were absolutely inundated, and the inquiry, they couldn't silence it. They even, at his funeral, he was the patron of the Royal Marines. Now, the Royal Marines are an elite fighting force, they're well respected in the UK, you know, and they made him a patron and actually carried his coffin. They laid him to rest in a graveyard in the north of England with a huge tombstone. And after this programme went out, the tombstone was smashed, and the BBC really went into meltdown over this. And I think that they're now questioning whether people should pay their TV licence. The government are looking at it because of Jimmy Savile, what he'd been doing. And the BBC had known about it for just so long, and his connections with people high up. But with that, a couple of police officers came forward. So I thought, well, I've got to speak out. I have to speak out. So I made an allegation against a senior officer who threatened me, and I said I will only speak to a high-ranked woman detective. And I was told by the corruption police, well, why has it got to be a woman detective? It can't be a uniform, so it needs to be a detective, and it needs to be a woman. And I said, because a woman can't roll up her trouser leg. Now, a lot of people might not know what that means, but what that means is she's not going to be a Mason. Now, I'm not accusing Masons at all of covering up paedophilia, but I know that there's going to be loyalties within certain groups. I've seen it within police units, there's been loyalties and people were silenced. I didn't want any other loyalty going on, you know? So this woman did speak to me, high-ranking detective, and she did take the allegation and reported it as a crime. And then what happened was I was exposed then to nearly 4 years of intense bullying.
4 years, oh my God.
4 years, and it resulted in my pay being stopped. It resulted in me being investigated for so many different offences. One of them could have carried a 15-year prison sentence. There was 9 files went to the Crown Prosecution Service to get me prosecuted. So they wanted me in prison. It was clear what they wanted to happen. And the real changing point for me was that my son, one of my boys, was involved in a terrible accident and ended up on life support. And I got called to the hospital because he'd actually died. He was dead for 7.5 minutes. And they called me in the hospital. By this time I had no money, I had no income. The bank had been round my house twice to look at taking my home off me because I couldn't pay my mortgage. Luckily, the bank were quite sympathetic. So, and the woman,
nice to hear.
The woman actually told me about her family history, and she said, no one will touch you for the time being. And so they did have an arrangement where I paid a minimum amount. They were really good. So although I'm not a fan of banks, you know, on this occasion they were really supportive. So I nearly lost my home. So the threat was you'll lose your home, your job. Well, I was looking at going to prison So I was going to lose my job and my liberty. The last one was my children. Now, there was a girl that I worked with, a lovely girl, and she knew someone very high up in the police. And when my son was taken into intensive care, she actually contacted a high-ranked officer and said, look, you know, please can you help Jon Wedger? He's in such trouble and he's done nothing wrong. And look, we're worried for him because his son is in intensive care. And she said, I've just heard that his son's actually died. And she said, you know, we're really worried. Please help him. So they said, well, we'll deal with this. So I went up to the hospital and my son was on 100% life support. And they were looking at turning his life support machine off after 5 days. And I stayed with him for 3 days and I had no money. I was sleeping in my car, you know, when I weren't, you know, they had to change him, you know, and every now and then. So I'd go and have a few hours sleep in my car and then I just held his hand. And on the 3rd day, he actually woke up. So I had 2 days before they were going to turn his machine off anyway.
Wow.
He actually woke up. And they then thought he was brain damaged because he was dead for so long, but he wasn't.
Wow.
And he actually showed a response. So I went home. I was just shattered. And at home, I had a 16-year-old son, and I had an 18-year-old son, and I had a 24-year-old son, I think, at the time. And when I got home, the police, there was 2 detectives there, and they were going to arrest me for child neglect for leaving my 16-year-old boy home alone. So knowing what they knew about the situation I was in, knowing what they knew about I was whistleblowing, the Metropolitan Police, the London Police, decided they had one offence they could have me for, and that was leaving a child home alone. Bear in mind, he was with an adult anyway, and they were going to arrest me. And I said to the detectives, before you do anything, you speak to my children and you look around my house. So they look around your fridge and make sure we got food in, they make sure the house is warm. So they did everything, spoke to my boys. And then I said, then you listen to me. And I told them my story. And luckily this detective, he turned around and he'd give me a big hug. And he said, you know, I've been in the military, I'm now in the police, I've had enough. I've seen too much corruption, I'm leaving next year. We've been lied to and you've been stitched up. Stitched up means you've been accused falsely of something, you know. And he left. So the threats of losing my home, my children, my job, that's what they did. And then I found out that there was other police officers that had been through the same. And there was one woman who'd exposed child prostitution in Manchester. They did the same to her. They tried to have her put in prison. She actually thought she was going to get 2 years in prison. She actually went home and told her daughters, Mummy's going to prison. You know, there was another police officer who had exposed the island of Jersey. There was a children's home called Haute de la Garenne, in which children were killed, they were murdered. On the island he had found bones there and they'd covered that up, and they did the same. They threatened to arrest him. He had to leave the island. There was an arrest warrant put out for him. So we're seeing a higher level corruption, and the pattern in which the police, the British police, attack those that speak out is identical on each occasion. It's exactly the same. But what it did for me was it changed me. It made me stronger, and I didn't give up. And and in the end, I did get my pension and I did manage to leave. The Crown Prosecution Service, a prosecution agency for the Queen, dropped every single allegation against me. You know, there wasn't even words of advice or anything. They dropped everything. And I was allowed to retire from the police. They didn't want me to retire because whilst I was still employed, they could do what they wanted with me, and they could buy my silence. Well, they couldn't buy my silence. There's no one can buy my silence, you know. Well, they thought they could. And then from there, I started, as I had done for a while, working with victims and survivors of abuse. And I then started interviewing people because I was an interviewer for the police. It was part of my skill set in the police. And I started not just talking to the victims and survivors, but talking to professionals, people from the prison service, psychiatrists, people involved in the religious organisations, all to do with the cover-ups and you know, psychologists and things like that. And it was fascinating what came out, and everyone, bar the religious people, they're the exception, were saying the same thing about the cover-ups and how much child abuse is at the core of everything. And then the one thing that kept cropping up was satanic ritual abuse. And that, a bit like speaking out against the police, was when attacks started coming as well, when I started speaking out against that.
So that's a big theme, huh?
It's massive. It's just huge. It's no one talks about it. No one even investigates it. I mean, there have been. I think I've got a list. I'll have to get off you. There's a guy called Wilfred Wong who he's an ex-serviceman, and he's a barrister, an ex-barrister as well. And he's made it his sort of life's campaign to investigate satanic ritual abuse. And he's got a list of cases that have gone through the British courts and has been successful prosecutions with a satanic element to them. And there's a lot in recent years. So there's no way it's a myth. And I've spoke to victims of it as well, you know, and the damage it does, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. That's really crazy. And you're also supporting whistleblowers now, right? So how do you do that?
Well, what I do was I campaign, and outside of House of Parliament once a month, there's a group of us, we get together, and I do a live feed on Facebook, and I call out to whistleblowers to speak up. And the government, the British government, has set up an inquiry. It's called the Independent Investigation into Child Sexual Abuse, IICSA, and it's on its third hearing now, and I've been asked to give evidence. And this is other whistleblowers that have spoken out, and we've been given a platform now. And it's a protected environment, so no one can sort of hinder what you say. And on top of that, I do my Facebook please, and I ask people, whatever remit they're in, to come forward and to speak out, because covering it up is a crime in itself. You're not in the wrong. And I tell them, don't be scared, do not be scared. It's difficult with the police because the police get such a good pension. And they don't want to speak out because they'll lose their pension.
Huh?
They're afraid.
To lose that.
They're afraid to go through what I've gone through. No one wants to go, and I can't blame them, because one man said to me, why should I come forward? You've just told me 3 good reasons not to come forward. You know, you lose.
Yeah, if it's just about the money, I can understand. I cannot understand it, but if it's threats against children and stuff, then I can understand that, right? But if it's all about just money, I don't see the point of just looking away, you know?
Well, how can you look away?
Yeah, how can you? That's the question, right?
You know, if you just put yourself in the position of that frightened child, because someone said to me, they went, are you not frightened? I said, okay, well, let's look at fear. What is fear? And I said, my fear is as a grown man speaking out against the cover-ups and telling the truth, right? So why should I be frightened of that? But what about that child that had to go through it? That's the real fear. That poor little child that is sitting there petrified, you know, knowing they're going to be hurt, they're going to be raped, they're totally confused. And then wetting the bed out of fear, and then getting punished for that, and then it goes on. And you know, the degradation that they put these children through. And I just thought, no, how can I allow this? How can I allow? You know, we have these international organisations that want to save the whales, the dolphins, and donkeys out in Africa that are malnourished and work too hard and all that. And people, the donkey one, for instance. The UK's got it, it's donkey sanctuaries and that. They've got so much money, they don't know what to do with it. Yeah, but you do anything for children, no one gives you anything.
Yeah, that is...
They don't want to know.
Strange.
Very strange.
It's like that. I can't really explain that. Maybe it's because people can't imagine that really stuff like that happens to children. It's hard for them to understand that's really true. Yeah,
but I think if they soul searched, they'd realise that it probably went on in their family. You know, because it covers, it's across the board, you know, and if they knew the symptoms of abuse, alcoholism, anger, aggression,
Yeah.
you know, dysfunctionality, not being able to keep down a job because it's control. You know, there's one guy I know can't have a bank account because he won't have the bank telling him what to do. You know, because it's people in control, people hatred of authority and things like that. And then, I mean, one of them was one guy we dealt with. He said, I can't even keep a job because I shit myself because my bowels are damaged, and I can't. I just soil myself. And he was crying as he was saying it, and he felt so sorry for this guy. And I remember a kid at school, and he was always missing himself, and then the teachers would beat him because he was naughty as well. And when I look back, I'm thinking he was being abused.
Yes, of course.
He was being abused. That's what his problem was. He was being raped at home. So when people realise how close to home this is, then maybe they and also when they realise, you know, that the person who burgles a house is on heroin, and he's burgling the house to pay for his heroin. You know, the beggar outside the shop is on heroin and is paying for it. But then let's bring the timeline back.
Yeah.
Why are they on heroin?
Right.
And it's difficult for people to have sympathy for somebody who's not working and who's begging.
Difficult people.
You know, difficult people, yeah. I mean, it's like the guy, Billy, that I do a lot of work with, he said, I couldn't be fostered. No one would have me because I just smashed the house up. I was wild. I was a wild animal. I spent all my life, juvenile life, in government-run institutions, government children's prisons. He said, because you couldn't put me anywhere because it was too violent. You know, yet the most compassionate, kindest guy I've ever met. You know, and this is what happens. It comes out in the aggression, and you know they call them nutcases, psychopaths, and all that. But what made them that?
Right, that's the
Was
question
turn
we
this
have to ask.
man into an angry dog. And when they realise that it comes down to this, and this is what we've got to do. We've got to highlight the sheer extent of abuse and the detriment it causes to society.
What does someone who wants to blow the whistle need to know?